My name is Margaret Hayes, though most people call me Maggie, and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. The funeral for my husband, Edward, was the quietest day of my existence. There, beside his grave under a gray, trembling sky, I received a message from an unknown number that sent a chill through my bones. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My hands trembled as I replied, "Who are you?" The response came seconds later and took my breath away. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." That moment tore my soul in two. My world crumbled as I lifted my head and saw Michael and Jason, my own sons, standing by the casket with strangely calm expressions. Their tears seemed rehearsed, their hugs cold and distant. Something was wrong. For 42 years, Edward had been my partner, my refuge, my reason for breathing. And suddenly, everything I knew about my life felt like a fragile illusion. I met Edward when I was 24, in a small town called Spring Creek. We'd grown up on the same dusty back, sharing modest dreams of better days. I cleaned houses to care for my sick mother, while Edward repaired bicycles in a tiny shop he'd inherited from his father. We were poor, but we were happy we had something money couldn't buy: real love. I still remember the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning, sunlight filtering through the old oak trees that lined Main Street. I was walking toward the market in a faded green dress and worn-out shoes when he stepped out of his shop, hands smudged with grease, and smiled at me with that shy, crooked grin that changed my life. "Good morning, Maggie," he said in a soft voice. "Need me to check out your bike?" I didn't even own a bike, but I blurted out some silly excuse just to keep him talking. That conversation turned into long afternoons under the big oak tree in Town Square Park, into stolen glances and whispered promises of forever, and eventually into a small wedding filled with laughter, hope, and the scent of wildflowers. The first few years were tough. We lived in a tiny 2-bedroom house with a tin roof that rattled every time the rain came down. When the storms hit, we'd set out pots and pans across the floor to catch the leaks, laughing as we raced the drips. Edward worked from sunrise to sunset in his shop, and I sewed clothes for the women in town. When Michael was born, my heart felt too full for my chest to hold. He had his father's big brown eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Jason arrived, just as perfect, just as loved. I raised them with every ounce of love I had, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. Edward was a wonderful father. He took them fishing at the river on Sundays, taught them how to fix things with their hands, and told them bedtime stories about bravery and kindness. We were a close family, or so I believed, but as the boys grew older, the distance began. Michael, the oldest, had a restless hunger for more. Even as a teenager, he'd ask why we lived so modestly, why we didn't have a car like other families. Jason, ever the follower, echoed his brother's words. When Michael turned 18, Edward offered him a job at the shop, hoping to pass down his craft. Michael refused with open disdain. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad," he said sharply. "I'm going to be someone important." Those words shattered Edward's heart, though he never said it aloud. At night, I'd find him sitting on the porch, staring into the dark, his face caught between pride and sorrow. His son hadn't just rejected his work, he'd rejected his way of life. Years passed, and to my surprise, Michael did make something of himself in the business world. He got a job at a real estate firm in the city, and Jason followed soon after. They started making more money than Edward and I had ever seen. At first, I was proud. My boys had done what we couldn't. They'd escaped poverty. But pride slowly turned into loneliness. The visits became rare, the phone calls shorter. When they came home, it was in expensive cars, dressed in tailored suits, talking about investments and properties we didn't understand. They looked at us with that strange mix of pity and embarrassment, like we were relics of another time. "Mom," Michael said one afternoon, during one of their rare visits, "you and Dad should really move somewhere better. This house is falling apart." He was right. Of course the roof still leaked. The paint was peeling, but that little house held our lives. It was where our babies had taken their first steps, where we'd shared thousands of dinners, where we'd grown old together. "It's not much," I told him, "but it's home." Edward squeezed my hand that night and said, "Money's changed them, Maggie. We aren't enough for them anymore." I didn't want to believe him. I told myself they were just busy, building their own lives. "Someday they'll come around," I whispered. But deep down, I knew he was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. The real distance began when Michael married Brittany Albright, a city woman who never bothered to hide her disdain for our simple life. The first time she visited, She stepped out of their sleek black car in stiletto heels that sank into the dirt of our porch. She wore a red designer dress that probably cost more than everything in our house. "Nice to meet you," she said with a forced smile, extending only her fingertips. Her gaze swept over our living room like a critic inspecting a cheap motel. During dinner, Brittany barely touched her food. She poked the meatloaf, cut her chicken into tiny pieces, but barely ate a bite. "Next time, we'll take them to a restaurant," she whispered to Michael, thinking I couldn't hear. But I did, every word, and each one cut deeper than a knife. Jason stayed single, but he followed his brother's lead. His visits were brief, distracted, and full of business calls. "Mom, I have to go," he'd say, glancing at his phone. "I've got an early meeting tomorrow." Family Sundays faded. Christmas became formal, sterile. They brought gifts we didn't need, blenders, fancy wine, and stayed just long enough to ease their conscience. Edward and I grew old alone, holding on to each other as the world around us moved faster and colder. The pressure began softly, like a draft sneaking through a cracked window. Michael started bringing papers in sleek folders he never let me hold for more than a second. "Mom, I've been thinking about your future," he'd say, with that polished smile he learned in boardrooms. "This house is worth, at most, $1,000. If you sell now, I can add some money to move you and Dad somewhere better." Somewhere better meant anywhere that wasn't the home where our boys had taken their first steps, where we'd laughed ourselves breathless under a leaky roof, where Edward and I had mapped out a life we built with our hands. There was no spreadsheet that could tally that kind of value. "Besides," Michael continued, tapping the table as if he were closing a deal, "Dad should really retire. He's 70. It's time." Jason nodded along like an echo. "At your age, an accident could be dangerous." They sounded concerned, but beneath the honeyed tones I heard something taut and impatient. In the following weeks, they brought realtors without telling us. They got an appraisal behind our backs. They floated numbers at dinner, as if our memories were line items to be liquidated. One night, Brittany put down her glass and touched of the iced tea I'd made and said, "There are very nice communities for people your age. You'd have friends, activities, it would be comfortable." Edward's jaw tightened. "We're fine in our house," he said gently but firmly. Their eyes met across the table. Michael's calculating, Jason's flickering, and a silence bloomed that felt like the air before a storm. Then came the day Michael arrived with a new idea he called sensible planning. "Think of it as an early inheritance," he told us. "You sell the house, we invest the money for you, and we'll help with our future kids' expenses. It benefits everyone." Early inheritance while we were still alive. The audacity rattled my bones. Edward kept calm, but the muscle in his cheek twitched. "Son," he said, voice low, "when your mother and I die, everything we have will be yours. While we are alive, our decisions are our own." Jason sighed, annoyed in a way I had never seen when he was a child. "You can't live in the past forever." After they left, Edward and I sat on the porch in the dark, listening to cicada scraping the summer night. "Something's wrong, Maggie," he said, eyes fixed on the gravel drive. "This isn't just impatience. There's something else pushing them." I wanted to argue, to smooth it over with reassurances, but the words turned to ash. 3 weeks later, a Tuesday morning, I was making meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Edward's favorite, when the phone rang with a sharpness that seemed to split the kitchen. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." My world narrowed to a pinhole. Our neighbor, Linda, drove because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When we arrived, Michael and Jason were already in the waiting room. Suits immaculate, expressions composed in a way that did not fit the moment. "How did you get here so fast?" I asked stupidly. Michael hugged me, too tight, too practiced. "A machine exploded at the shop, Mom. Dad's got severe burns and a head injury." My stomach fell. Exploded. Edward was meticulous. He treated every bolt like a living thing. A nurse allowed one visitor at a time, 5 minutes only. When I reached his bed, I barely recognized him, bandages covering so much of the man I loved, machines breathing for him, beeping like mechanical heartbeats in the dim. I took his hand, one patch of unbandaged skin, warm and familiar, and whispered, "Ed, I'm here. I'm right here." For an instant, I felt the faintest squeeze. The nurse said it could be a reflex, but in that moment I knew my husband was still fighting his way toward me. The next days blurred. Stale coffee, sleepless chairs, whispered prayers. Michael and Jason spoke more to doctors than to their father. I heard slivered questions: insurance coverage, beneficiaries, costs. Mom, Michael said on day 2, we reviewed Dad's life insurance. It's $50,000. Workers' comp could add 75 money, while my husband drifted between worlds. I don't care about the money, I snapped. I care about your father. He murmured agreement, but his eyes were cool, an abacus clicking. On the 3rd day, Dr. Robert Patterson ushered us into a small office, voice thick with practiced compassion. Your husband's condition is critical. Infections have set in. The head trauma is more severe than we hoped. We need to be realistic about his chances. We want everything, I said. We try everything. Michael and Jason exchanged a look that felt like a door closing. Mom, Jason said, tone syrupy sad. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He said he never wanted to be a burden. He is your father, I hissed. Not a burden. That night, alone by Edward's bed, I told him stories about the boys when they were small, about the time the roof leaked over the crib and he moved it into the kitchen, about the oak tree and the vows we whispered under its shade. His lips trembled, a breath shifted, the faintest movement. The nurse called it a spasm. I called it a message from my husband. Hold on. 2 days later, just before dawn, alarms screamed, lights flashed, nurses rushed. No, I screamed, barefoot in the hall, running, reaching, helpless. For 40 minutes they worked, but at 4:37 a.m., Edward was pronounced dead. I folded over his chest and pleaded with God to give him back. An hour later, Michael and Jason arrived with papers, phone numbers, and an eerie efficiency. We already spoke to Spring Creek Funeral Home, Michael said. The body can be transferred this morning. The insurance claim is already started, Jason added. Their brisk competence made my skin crawl. The funeral was set for Monday. Michael handled everything, choosing the simplest casket and the shortest service. It's what Dad would have wanted, he said. It wasn't. Edward loved people. He belonged to his town, and his town belonged to him. But the service was small, just us, Brittany, Linda, the pastor. No co-workers, no neighbors, no one from the shop. Where are the guys from the shop? I asked. We didn't want to bother anyone, Michael answered too quickly. Dad liked privacy. He did not. During the service, Michael kept checking his watch. Jason stared past the pastor like he was in an elevator between floors. Brittany's veil hid the way she looked at her phone, but I saw the glow. When it was time to throw the first handful of dirt, my knees buckled and Linda held me upright. The sound of earth hitting the wood was the loneliest sound in the world. That was when my phone vibrated, a cold shock through a numb body. An unknown number. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. The sky tilted. The words swam. My fingers moved on their own. Who are you? The reply came at once. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. The phone slipped from my hands and clattered against the grass. Linda bent to pick it up. No, I whispered, grabbing it first. Michael was suddenly at my elbow. Mom, you okay? His face was arranged perfectly, worry placed, just so. I studied him like a stranger. I'm fine, I lied, tucking the phone into my purse as if it were a live wire. I just need to go home. That night, the house felt like a mausoleum. I walked room to room, touching the mug he'd used, the jacket on the chair back, the indentation in his pillow. The message pulsed in my mind like a fever. If Edward was alive, who had we buried? And if he was dead, who knew enough to send that warning? Why had my sons been first at the hospital? Why did the shop have no scorch marks in my memory of the workbench smells and habits that never included explosion? Grief tried to shut me down. Suspicion kept me moving. I went to Edward's desk, the old wooden one, with the dinged corner he refused to fix. In the metal box we kept 4 documents. I found the life insurance Michael mentioned recently updated, 6 months ago, from 5 to 50,000. A workers' comp policy purchased just 2 months before he died. My phone vibrated again. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. I stared into the dim kitchen and felt something inside me harden into resolve. Whatever waited at the end of these messages, I would follow it. I owed Edward the truth, and I owed myself the fight. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds as if afraid to touch me. I hadn't slept at all. My mind kept replaying that message. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. Around 9, I put on my gray cardigan, the one Edward always said made me look too serious, and walked to the bank where we'd kept our savings for 30 years. Karen Thompson, the branch manager, had known us since the boys were toddlers. She came around the counter and hugged me softly. Oh, Margaret, I'm so sorry about Ed. He was a good man. Thank you, Karen, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I need to see our account statements for the last few months. She hesitated, then led me to her desk. Of course, she printed the pages and handed them over. What I saw made the blood drain from my face. In the last 3 months, large withdrawals had been made from our savings: 1,000 in January, 3,000 in February, 4,000 in March. Money I had never authorized, never even heard about. Who signed for these? I asked. Karen flipped through the pages. Your husband came in each time, said it was for repairs at the shop. Once or twice, your son came along, Michael, I think. He said your husband needed help with the paperwork because his eyesight wasn't so good anymore. I stared at her. Edward's eyesight was fine. He never had trouble reading anything. I studied the signatures. They looked like his handwriting, but shaky, uncertain, as if written by a hand that didn't quite belong to him. Karen, I whispered, did he ever seem unwell when he came in? She frowned, thinking, no, not exactly. Quiet, maybe a little distracted, but your son did most of the talking. That afternoon, sitting alone at the kitchen table, I spread out the receipts like puzzle pieces. The ink shimmered under the light. Then my phone buzzed again. The insurance was their idea. They convinced him it was for your protection. It was a trap. I pressed my palms against the table to steady my shaking. Whoever was texting me knew too much. The next morning, I drove to Edward's shop. Michael had said one of the machines exploded, but when I arrived, the place was immaculate. Too immaculate. There were no burn marks, no broken glass, no smell of smoke, just polished metal gleaming in the morning light. Every tool hung neatly on its hook. The welding torch, the compressor, everything was exactly where it had always been. No sign of chaos, no evidence of any accident. My heart began to race. What had really happened here? I went to Edward's desk in the back office, half expecting to smell his cologne still lingering on the wood. The drawers were tidy, but something caught my eye: a note written in his careful, slanted handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. Michael insists I need more insurance, says it's for Maggie, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. My fingers went cold. Beneath it was another note, shakier this time. Jason brought me papers to sign, says it's to modernize the shop. Why the hurry? I don't understand what it's about. He had known. My husband had known something was wrong. At the bottom of the drawer, I found an envelope with my name on it, Margaret, in his familiar script. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest Maggie, it began. If you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. I've noticed strange changes in Michael and Jason. They're too interested in our money, the insurance, selling the house. Brittany is putting a lot of pressure on them. Yesterday, Michael said I should be more careful about my safety because at my age, any accident could be fatal. It sounded like a warning. I love you, Maggie. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed until my ribs ached. Edward had seen what I couldn't, what I refused to see. That night, I lit a candle by his photograph. I'll find the truth, Ed, I whispered. I promise you. Just before midnight, the phone buzzed again. Tomorrow, go to the police station, ask for the report on the accident. There are contradictions you need to know. That the next morning, I drove to the Spring Creek Police Department, my pulse hammering. Sergeant Daniel O'Connor greeted me with a confused smile. Mrs. Hayes, I'm so sorry about your loss. What can I do for you? I'd like a copy of the report from my husband's accident, I said. He frowned, turning to his computer. What accident? The explosion at his shop, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He typed for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. Ma'am, there's no report here about any explosion or workplace accident involving your husband. My stomach twisted. That can't be right. He was brought to Memorial Hospital. Yes, I see that part. But according to the medical report, he was admitted with symptoms of methanol poisoning, not burns or trauma. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood, enough to cause blindness, brain damage, even death. Methanol, poison. The room began to spin. Why didn't anyone tell me this? The immediate family requested confidentiality, O'Connor said softly. They said you were too fragile to handle the details. The immediate family, Michael and Jason. By the time I got back to the car, I was shaking so hard I could barely start the engine. My own sons had hidden the truth. They had lied to me, lied to everyone. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, and the words that had haunted me since the funeral echoed in my mind. Don't trust our sons. That evening, Jason stopped by with a bouquet of flowers. He set them on the counter, his eyes scanning my face. "You look tired, Mom," he said. "You should rest." "I'm fine," I answered quietly, watching him pour himself coffee. "You knew your father didn't die in an accident, didn't you?" For a heartbeat, his face froze. Then he smiled, the slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, you shouldn't go digging around. It's bad for your nerves." "I went to the police station," I said, voice trembling but loud enough. "They told me there was no explosion. Your father was poisoned." The mug clattered in his hand, spilling dark coffee over the counter. "You shouldn't believe everything you hear. You're grieving, you're confused." "I'm not confused," I snapped. "I'm finally seeing things clearly." He straightened his tie, avoiding my eyes. "I think you need rest. We'll talk later." And then he walked out, making a quick phone call on the porch. That night, another message arrived. "They're coming together tomorrow. They'll try to convince you you're crazy. Don't eat or drink anything they offer." I sat in the dark, the phone glowing in my palm, and realized this wasn't just about finding the truth anymore. It was about survival. The next morning, the sky hung low and heavy, a curtain of gray pressing against the windows. I had barely finished my coffee when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. A black SUV stopped outside, and through the curtain, I saw Michael, Jason, and Brittany stepping out, their faces set in an unsettling mix of concern and control. They were early, too early for a casual visit. My stomach tightened. I remembered the message from last night. Don't eat or drink anything they offer. I stood quietly by the counter, forcing my breathing to steady as they came in. "Mom," Michael began, his voice syrupy sweet, "we've been worried about you. The neighbors said you've been acting a little strange." I blinked. "Strange?" "Yes," Jason added quickly. "Linda mentioned you've been talking to yourself, that you're not eating properly. We're worried about your mental health." I gripped the edge of the counter. Linda had said no such thing. "I'm fine," I said coldly. Brittany walked over to the table and placed the bag down with exaggerated care. "I brought your favorite pastries from the downtown bakery," she said, smiling. "And we made coffee from that brand you love. Thought it'd cheer you up." The smell drifted through the air, sweet, buttery, and wrong. "Thank you," I replied, forcing a smile. "But I already ate." Jason frowned. "You haven't even looked." I said I already ate. The three exchanged glances, silent communication flowing between them like static. Then Michael pulled out a chair across from me and sat down, folding his hands neatly on the table. "Mom," he said softly, "we need to talk about some things that have been happening. The police told us you went there asking questions about Dad's accident." "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "They told me there was no explosion, that he was poisoned." Michael's face didn't move, but the light in his eyes shifted, cold, metallic. "Mom, you can't believe everything you hear. You're grieving. Sometimes grief makes us imagine things." "I'm not imagining anything." "Actually," Jason interrupted, voice carefully calm, "we talked to a doctor, Dr. Alan Albright. He said that after a big loss, people your age can develop paranoia. It's common. Paranoia." I laughed bitterly. "You're calling me paranoid because I want to know what happened to my husband." Brittany leaned forward, fake sympathy dripping from every word. "We're not accusing you of anything, Margaret. We're just worried. That's why we think it would be best if you took some time in a special care home, just until you recover." I looked at her, unable to stop my voice from trembling. "You mean a retirement home?" "It's not like that," Michael said quickly. "It's a place with professionals, nurses, therapists. It's comfortable. You'll be safe." Safe. The word rolled through the air like poison. I stood up slowly. "I'm not going anywhere." Jason sighed, rubbing his forehead as though I were a stubborn child. "Mom, please, we're trying to help. If you keep refusing, we might have to take more serious steps." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then spoke in that same businesslike tone that used to make me proud and now made me sick. "We spoke to Judge Carter this morning. If you continue to act irrationally, we can start the legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent. For your own good, of course." I felt my pulse in my ears. "You would do that to me, your own mother?" Michael's smile was a thin line. "If it's necessary, we can't let you hurt yourself or make bad financial choices. We already have statements from Dr. Albright confirming signs of cognitive decline, and witnesses." "Witnesses?" "Neighbors," Jason said quickly. "They've noticed your behavior too." I felt the ground slipping beneath me. They had planned this every step. They would take my home, my money, my freedom, and then say they did it out of love. And if I don't agree, I whispered. Michael stood, buttoning his coat. Then the court will decide. We're trying to make this easy. Mom, I wanted to scream, to throw something, to shake them until they remembered who they were, but the realization settled in like cold lead. These were not my boys anymore. The children I raised had been replaced by strangers in expensive suits. I need time to think, I said quietly. Of course, Brittany said sweetly, but not too long. For your own good. They left, closing the door softly behind them, and the silence they left behind was deafening. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the untouched pastries. My reflection looked back from the window, an old woman surrounded by ghosts. Then the phone buzzed again. Margaret, my name is Stephen Callahan. I'm a private investigator. Edward hired me 3 weeks before he died. He suspected Michael and Jason were planning something. He was right. They poisoned him with methanol in his morning coffee. I have the evidence. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the corner cafe. Sit at the back table. I'll find you. My breath caught. So that was who had been sending the messages. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. My hands still trembled, but now it wasn't from fear, it was determination. That night, I packed Edward's letter, the notes from his desk, and the bank statements into my purse. Then I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the dark street outside. I knew they were capable of anything now. They'd already murdered once. If I didn't act fast, I would be next. But this time, I wasn't alone. The next day, I dressed carefully in my deep purple dress, the one I wore to church on special occasions, and tied my silver hair into a bun. At 2:30, I walked toward the corner cafe, every step a battle between courage and dread. Inside, the smell of coffee and old wood felt almost comforting. I chose the farthest table, back to the wall, eyes on the door. At exactly 3 o'clock. A tall man with gray hair and kind, sharp eyes walked in. He carried a brown folder under one arm and scanned the room until his gaze met mine. Mrs. Hayes, he asked in a low voice. Yes, I said. I'm Stephen Callahan. I'm sorry for your loss. Edward was a good man. He sat across from me and placed the folder on the table. Before I show you what I found, you need to understand it's not going to be easy to hear. I've been ready since the day of his funeral, I said. He pressed play on a small voice recorder. Edward's voice filled the small space. Soft, weary, familiar. Stephen, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Michael and Jason keep pushing me to increase my life insurance. They say it's to protect Maggie, but the papers they brought would benefit them directly. I can't shake the feeling something's wrong. Tears blurred my vision. Stephen's expression was steady, respectful. He played another clip, Michael's voice, cold and unmistakable. We can't wait any longer. The old man's starting to get suspicious. I've got the methanol. It'll look like a stroke or a heart attack. By the time anyone figures it out, it'll be too late. I covered my mouth, choking back a sob. My own son, my child, had said those words. Stephen continued quietly. There's more. Jason was recorded the day before Edward's death saying they'd mix it into his morning coffee. They even discussed what symptoms would appear and how to fake concern. The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. How did you get this? Your husband asked me to plant small recorders in the house and in his shop, Stephen explained. He didn't know exactly what they were planning, just that it wasn't good. He wanted a record if anything happened. He opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. It showed Michael leaving a hardware store, holding a small bottle. This is the methanol, Stephen said, bought with cash, under a false name. 5 days before Edward's death. I could barely breathe. So it's all true. Yes, he said gently. And there's one more recording you need to hear. It's the hardest one. He pressed play again. 2 voices, Michael and Jason. Once Dad's gone, we need to deal with Mom too, Michael said. We can't risk her asking questions. Jason hesitated. How? The same way. A widow overcome with grief, no one will question it. Then it's all ours. The insurance, the house, everything. My whole body went cold. The cafe sounds disappeared. All I could hear was the faint hum of the recorder and my own heartbeat when the recording ended. Stephen looked at me steadily. Mrs. Hayes, we have enough to prove they killed your husband and that they're planning to kill you. But we need to act fast. They've already contacted a judge to declare you incompetent tomorrow morning. I swallowed hard. Then we act tonight. He nodded. Agreed. That was the night I stopped being a grieving widow and became something else. entirely a woman ready to fight for justice. That night, the world outside was wrapped in silence, but my heart beat so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. I sat across from Stephen in my kitchen, the folder of evidence between us, its edges glowing faintly under the yellow light. "We go straight to the police," I said, my voice firm. "Sergeant O'Connor will listen." Stephen nodded. "He's honest. I've worked with him before. But we have to be careful. If your sons find out before the arrest, they might destroy the remaining evidence or worse, come after you." I looked down at Edward's wedding ring on my finger, the metal worn smooth by years of ordinary love. "They've already taken everything from me that matters," I whispered. "They won't take my life, too." We arrived at the Spring Creek police station just after 8 in the evening. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, the air cool and still. Sergeant Daniel O'Connor looked up from his desk, surprise flickering in his tired eyes. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Callahan, what brings you here this late?" "I need to file a report," I said, setting the folder on his desk with trembling hands. "My husband, Edward Hayes, was murdered by our own sons." For the next 2 hours, Stephen and I laid everything out: the recordings, the photos, the forged signatures, the bank withdrawals, the medical report showing methanol poisoning, the doctor's bribe, the planned declaration of my mental incompetence. O'Connor listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening, his fingers clenching a pen until it snapped. When the final recording, my sons calmly discussing my death, ended, he sat in silence for a long time. "My God," he murmured, "this is monstrous." He looked at me, his voice softening. "Mrs. Hayes, are you certain you want to proceed? Once we arrest them, there's no turning back." I straightened in my chair. "Sergeant, those men killed my husband for money. They were planning to kill me next. I have nothing left to lose." He nodded grimly and picked up the phone, calling the district attorney. Within an hour, District Attorney Mark Ellis arrived, hair disheveled, tie loosened, expression hard as stone. He reviewed the evidence, his eyes widening at each page. "This is airtight," he said finally. "We'll get the warrants tonight. Arrests at dawn." By the time Stephen drove me home, the clock read nearly midnight. "Are you sure you'll be safe alone?" he asked, pausing at the door. "I've never felt safer," I said. "For the first time, I know the truth." He smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "You're braver than most people I know, Mrs. Hayes." After he left, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, the same place where I'd spent so many nights sewing while Edward tinkered in his shop. The walls still smelled faintly of oil and coffee. I looked at the photo on the counter, Edward grinning, his arm around me. Both of us sunburned from a summer fishing trip decades ago. "We're almost there, Ed," I whispered. "We're going to make this right." Just before dawn, my phone rang. The shrill sound pierced the quiet. I answered with a trembling hand. "Mom," said Michael's voice, urgent but oddly composed. "You need to come to Jason's house right away. Something terrible's happened." My pulse quickened. "What happened?" "It's better if I tell you in person. Please just come." A trap. I knew it the moment he spoke. His voice had that practiced calm I'd come to recognize from years of half-truths, but I played along. "I'm on my way," I said, and hung up. Instead of leaving, I stayed by the window, watching the morning light creep over the neighborhood. My hands gripped my mug, the steam curling upward like breath. At 7:30, 2 police cars roared down the street, one turning toward Michael's house, the other toward Jason's. I stood motionless, heart pounding. Within minutes, the radio static and flashing lights filled the air. I knew it was over. At 9, Sergeant O'Connor knocked on my door. His expression was a mixture of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "we've arrested both of your sons. They're in custody." I sank into the chair by the door, every muscle shaking. "How did they react?" "Michael denied everything until we played the recordings," the sergeant said. "Then he just Baduk croaked. Jason tried to run. We caught him 6 blocks away." I closed my eyes, and for the first time since Edward's death, I felt something close to relief. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was the feeling of finally being able to breathe. That afternoon, Brittany came to my door, her mascara streaked, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Hayes," she sobbed, "please, you have to drop the charges. Michael made mistakes, but he was desperate. I pressured him about the money. It's my fault too." I looked at her without emotion. "He poisoned his father," I said quietly. "He planned to kill me. There's no forgiveness for that. But we're family," she cried. "The family died," I said, "the day you chose greed over love," and I closed the door. 3 days later, the county exhumed Edward's body. The medical examiner confirmed what we already knew: lethal levels of methanol. The newspapers called it the Hayes murders, a story of greed, betrayal, and a mother's courage. The town buzzed with gossip, but I avoided the noise. I only visited the cemetery once that week, bringing Edward's favorite wildflowers. "You can rest now," I told him. "Justice has finally come." The trial began 2 months later. The courtroom overflowed with people, neighbors, reporters, strangers who wanted to witness the story they'd read about in headlines. I wore a simple black dress and carried Edward's letter folded in my purse. When Michael and Jason entered in orange prison uniforms, I barely recognized them. The proud men who once looked down on their parents now looked small, pale, hollow. The prosecutor presented every piece of evidence with cold precision: the recordings, the forged documents, the financial records. The jury listened in horrified silence. When they played the tape of my sons planning my death, an audible gasp rippled through the room. I could feel eyes on me, some filled with pity, others with disbelief. But I sat still. I had already cried enough tears for a lifetime. When it was my turn to testify, my legs trembled, but my voice did not. "I raised them with love," I told the court. "I gave them everything I could, but love cannot save people who have chosen greed. My husband's life ended because our sons forgot what it meant to be human." By the end of the third day, the verdict was clear: guilty on all counts. The judge's voice rang through the courtroom. For the premeditated murder of Edward Hayes and the conspiracy to murder Margaret Hayes, I sentence Michael and Jason Hayes to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 30 years. When the gavel fell, I felt the weight of years lift from my chest. Justice, cold, heavy, irreversible, had finally spoken. That night, I sat on the porch under the stars, the same porch where Edward once dreamed aloud about fixing up the roof, about seeing the boys become good men. "They'll learn to be kind," he used to say. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "They never learned, Ed." But I did. I learned to be strong. 6 months passed before I began to feel the rhythm of ordinary life again. The house no longer echoed with silence. Instead, it carried the faint sound of wind through the garden and the creak of old wood settling at night. I had decided to transform Edward's shop, the place where everything began and ended, into a garden filled with color and memory. I planted red roses for love, white carnations for peace, and yellow sunflowers because he always said they were the bravest flowers, the ones that never stopped reaching for the sun. Every morning, I'd sit by the window with my coffee, watching light spill over the petals, and whisper, "Look, Ed, we made something beautiful again." The trial had ended, but its echoes lingered. Some people in Spring Creek treated me like a hero. Others whispered when I passed, calling me the mother who sent her sons to prison. I learned to ignore the whispers. They didn't understand that I hadn't chosen justice over love. I had chosen truth over lies. The truth hurts, but lies destroy everything. A few weeks after the verdict, Stephen Callahan stopped by with a small smile and 2 cups of coffee. "You did it," he said, handing me one. "Edward would be proud." I smiled softly. "You helped me find my courage, Stephen. I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "You always had it. You just needed a reason to use it." We sat on the porch that evening, watching the fireflies spark in the dark. He told me stories about his case, his missing heirs, fraudulent wills, and even a stolen cat someone once paid him to find. His laughter filled the quiet places in my heart where grief had lived for too long. Somewhere between the stories and the starlight, I realized that companionship didn't have to end with loss. Sometimes, life offers second chances when we least expect them. One morning, 6 months later, a letter arrived in the mail stamped State Penitentiary. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Mom," it began in Michael's handwriting, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. The money, the debts, the greed, they blinded us. We lost everything that mattered. Jason and I destroyed the family for $50,000 we never even lived to enjoy. Tomorrow, I'll end it. I can't live with what we did. Tell Dad I'm sorry. Tell him we were fools." I read it twice before the tears came. The next day, the prison called to confirm what I already knew: Michael had hung himself in his cell. Jason, upon hearing the news, had a complete breakdown. He attacked a guard, then collapsed into sobs, screaming that our father was standing in his cell, asking, "Why, son?" They moved him to the prison psychiatric ward, where he remains to this day. When I first heard, I felt nothing: no joy, no revenge, just an aching, empty quiet. Later that night, I went to the cemetery with a small lantern and knelt beside Edward's grave. It's over, I whispered. All of it. They've paid their price. The wind stirred the grass gently, almost like a sigh. I wanted to believe it was him, finally resting. In the months that followed, I decided the insurance money couldn't stay with me. It was soaked in pain. So, with Stephen's help, I founded the Edward Hayes Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes. We started small, a single office above the bakery downtown, but word spread quickly. Within a year, the foundation was helping families across the state who had suffered betrayal, fraud, or abuse from within their own homes. We offered lawyers, psychologists, even private investigators. Every time we helped someone find justice, I felt like a piece of Edward's soul was being healed. 2 years later, on a quiet spring morning, a woman named Eleanor Price came to see me. She was 40, tired, and trembling. "My brother killed our mother," she said softly, "for the inheritance. I don't know what to do." Her story mirrored mine: greed, silence, fear. The foundation provided her with an investigator, legal support, and therapy. 3 months later, her brother was convicted. When Eleanor returned to thank me, she hugged me so tightly I could feel her heartbeat. "You saved my life," she whispered. "If you hadn't been brave, I never would have been." That night, I sat on the porch with Stephen, watching the moon rise over the garden. "Maybe this was why I had to go through it," I said quietly, "so I could help others survive." He nodded. "You turned pain into purpose, Maggie. That's what real courage looks like." Jason still writes to me sometimes. His letters are shaky, filled with apologies and half-remembered dreams. I keep them in a small shoebox under my bed, unopened. Maybe one day I'll read them. Maybe not. Forgiveness is a kind of peace, but so is letting go. As for Brittany, she disappeared soon after the trial. Someone said she moved to Chicago and changed her name. I don't hate her anymore. Hate is heavy, and I've carried enough weight in my life now. At 71, I live quietly in the same house Edward and I built together. I've painted the walls soft yellow, his favorite color. Every Sunday, I bring flowers to his grave and tell him about the families we've helped. The letters of gratitude that keep arriving. His headstone reads, "Edward Hayes, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than his death." Sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees, I swear I can hear him say, "You did good, Maggie." A few months ago, a young reporter visited to interview me for a documentary about family crimes. "If you could tell the world one thing," she asked, "what would it be?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "Family isn't defined by blood," I said softly. "It's defined by love, respect, and trust. The truth might hurt, but lies kill the soul. And it's never too late to seek justice, no matter who the culprit is." This year, on the 5th anniversary of Edward's death, we held a small memorial at the garden. Over 200 people came: neighbors, survivors, police officers, volunteers. Stephen gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Edward Hayes died because of his son's greed," he said, his voice steady. "But his legacy lives on in every family that found justice through his wife's courage. Evil tried to destroy their story, but love turned it into hope." When the crowd left, I stayed behind, walking among the flowers as the sun dipped low. The air was warm, filled with the scent of roses and earth. "We did it, Ed," I whispered. "Your death wasn't in vain." Later that evening, I sat on the porch with Stephen, as usual, 2 cups of coffee between us. He told me about a new case he'd taken, and I teased him for working too hard. When he left, I lingered in the quiet, staring up at the stars. The garden rustled softly. The wind felt like his hand on my shoulder. For the first time in years, I felt nothing but peace. Justice had found its place. And so had I. Did you like my story? And tell me, which city are you listening from tonight? I'd love to know if this story moved you. Please give the video a like and subscribe for more life stories like this. Stories about betrayal, awakening, and finding strength again. Every story I share comes straight from the heart. Can also support me directly by sending a super thanks. It helps me keep creating these emotional, true-to-life stories for you. Thank you so much for listening until the very end. I'm truly grateful for every one of you here. On the screen now, you'll see 2 other life stories I think you'll love. Tap to keep listening. There's so much more waiting on my channel. I'm May, and this was another story of courage, loss, and rebirth. See you in the next life story.